The winter of 1887 settled over Copper Ridge like a heavy, merciless hand. Snow crusted the open fields, turning the ranchlands into a white desert where cattle struggled to nose through frostbitten grass. The wind carried a bite sharp enough to make even seasoned cowhands bow their heads. Men moved more slowly, conserving energy, and the barns echoed with the groans of cold timber and weary livestock. Everything about the season felt stretched thin, from the ranch supplies to the people themselves. Marshal Ethan Carver rode the line that morning, the breath of his horse rising like smoke in the icy air. He was a ranch owner, lawman, and quiet guardian of the valley, roles he never boasted about but lived with steady conviction. His workers respected him for that calm presence, that sense he was always watching out for them without making a show of it. Ethan believed in one simple rule: help where you can, don't pry where you're not wanted. A man had to carry his own burdens, and Ethan honored that. Still, some burdens showed despite a person's best effort. He noticed Lena Porter before she noticed him. The widow was bent over a saddle blanket near the tack shed, her thin shoulders trembling from the cold and from the effort she couldn't spare. Lena worked harder than any woman ought to through winter, and harder than many men. She never missed a chore, never complained, and never asked for anything. That alone might have raised suspicion in a lesser man. But Ethan respected privacy. He kept his distance, watching her steady herself on the bench before bending again, pale and fragile under the gray morning light. A worker passed him and muttered, "She's a tough one, Marshal." Ethan nodded but didn't respond. Something in his gut twisted. Lena's pallor wasn't from the cold, not entirely. Her breath came tight and shallow. Her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. He rode closer, dismounting quietly. "Mornin', Lena." She startled, but only for a moment. Then she straightened with practiced composure, offering him the faint smile she always wore, the one that never reached her tired eyes. "Good morning, Marshal Carver." "You all right?" he asked, keeping his tone easy. She nodded a bit too quickly. "Just working through the cold. I'm used to it." Ethan wasn't convinced, but he didn't push. He offered a small, respectful tip of his hat and moved on, the unease in his chest lingering like a stone. By noon, the wind sharpened, slicing through the ranch yard. Men hurried inside for hot coffee and fresh logs for the stove. Ethan walked toward the barn to speak with his foreman when a sharp cry rose from inside, startled voices overlapping. He rushed in. Lena lay crumpled against the straw, her bucket of soapy water spilled across the floor. Two ranch hands knelt beside her, unsure what to do. Her face was drained of all color, her lips pale. Ethan knelt immediately, lifting her gently as she blinked back consciousness. "I'm all right," she whispered. "No, you're not," Ethan said, handing her a dip of clean water. "You fainted." Lena tried to push herself upright. "Just dizzy." "It's nothing. Please, I can finish the chore." Ethan studied her carefully. Her pulse fluttered weakly beneath his hand. Her wrists were thin. Far too thin. She was starving. "Lena," he said quietly, "you need to rest." "I can't." She shook her head, breath shivering. "I'm fine, truly." But he could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of accepting help. Whatever she was hiding, she was willing to collapse before letting anyone close enough to discover it. Ethan stood, jaw tight. His moral code tugged at him, help where you can, don't pry. But not prying had nearly killed her. That evening, when the men lined up for wages, Ethan paused at Lena's envelope. It felt too light in his hand, knowing how much she needed every cent. He saddled his horse again. Against every frontier custom, against the unspoken rule of respecting a worker's home space, he decided he would deliver her wages personally. He didn't know it yet, but that single choice would change everything. Ethan reached Lena Porter's homestead just as the last light of evening slipped behind the pines. Her cabin sat low in the snow, roof sagging under the winter's weight, chimney cold. No lantern glowed through the window. No sound of a fire crackled inside. For a woman raising a boy alone, the quiet felt wrong. He knocked once, twice. Lena opened the door only a crack, her body blocking the entrance as though guarding something behind her. The dimness inside seemed deliberate. "Marshall Carver," she said, surprised and worried. "Is something wrong?" He held out her wages. "You left before collecting these." Her fingers shook as she accepted the envelope. "Thank you. But you didn't have to come all this way." "It wasn't far," Ethan replied. She still didn't widen the door. "May I step inside and make sure you're all right?" Her answer came too fast. "No. No, thank you. Caleb's already asleep. We're fine." "Fine." She said it again, her voice brittle as dry wood. She was lying, but gently, as if she hoped her lie would protect him from something. Ethan hesitated. Pushing past a widow's boundary wasn't something he'd ever done. Frontier culture respected privacy the same way it respected fences. You didn't cross without invitation. But tonight he felt the same twist in his chest he'd felt at the ranch, the sense that something was wrong enough to override courtesy. Still, he stepped back. "If you need anything." "We don't," she said quickly. Her eyes softened, almost apologetic, and then she closed the door. Ethan stood staring at the shut cabin for a long moment. A lantern flickered to life inside, dim and small. Too small. Not enough to light a whole room. He turned his horse toward the path home, but suspicion trailed him like a shadow. By the time he reached the ranch, darkness had settled deep. Men were at supper, passing around bread and stew that Lena usually prepared. The kitchen felt emptier without her, and Ethan noticed the ranch hands whispering about her fainting spell. He stepped away, his mind elsewhere. He tried to focus on paperwork, but his concentration broke every few minutes. Lena's pale face haunted him. The way she guarded her doorway. The thinness of her wrists. The fear in her eyes when he'd offered help. By midnight, he'd given up on rest. Snow drifted thinly across the ground as he saddled his horse again. He moved quietly, not wanting questions from the hands. He lit no lantern. He didn't need one. The moon hung low and wide, bright enough to carve a silver path through the trees. He kept his distance when he reached Lena's cabin, staying downwind as he watched from the tree lean. A shape slipped from the house, Lena, wrapped in a thin shawl, clutching a small sack under her arm. She moved quickly, despite her weakness, slipping between the pines along a narrow trail. Ethan followed silently, keeping far enough to remain unseen. The forest grew darker, denser. After nearly a mile, Lena stopped near a collapsed outbuilding, barely a shed anymore, and disappeared behind it. Ethan crept closer. Voices. Small ones. When he reached the edge of the ruins, the scene stunned him so sharply he forgot to breathe. Behind the broken shed, a dying fire smoldered in a shallow pit, hardly more than embers. Around it huddled more than a dozen children, thin, shivering, wrapped in scraps of blankets and coats that were more holes than fabric. Face hollow. Eyes dull with hunger. Lena knelt in the middle of them, pulling food from her sack, bread crusts, potatoes, a handful of beans. She gave every morsel away, her own stomach empty. A tiny girl whispered, "Miss Lena, ain't you eatin'?" "Not tonight," Lena said softly, stroking the girl's hair. "You need it more." Ethan felt the truth hit him like a hammer to the chest. Lena Porter wasn't feeding only her son. She was feeding the valley's castaways, orphans from mining towns, widowed camps, families struck by cholera. Children no one else wanted, children who would have frozen or starved without her. She was starving herself to keep them alive. Ethan stepped back into the shadows, his breath shaken with a mix of awe, horror, and guilt. He had been so blind. All winter, he'd watched her with concern, but not enough action. That night, he rode home with a heavy heart. One thing was now certain. He could no longer stand at the edges of Lena Porter's suffering. He had to intervene, whether she wanted him to or not. Ethan Carver hardly slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those children, thin as fence rails, their cheeks hollow, their hands shaking as they reached for scraps Lena had saved from her own mouth. And he saw her, kneeling among them, giving away everything she had with a gentleness that broke something deep inside him. By dawn, the ranch stirred awake, but Ethan already sat saddled, ready to ride out. He wasn't heading to the line or the barns. He was headed into Copper Ridge town, driven by a determination he couldn't shake. The townsfolk were just opening their stores when he arrived. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked through the main street. Women sweeping storefronts paused at the sight of him, shopkeepers straightened nervously. Ethan wasn't the sort of lawman who came to town without cause. He went first to Doc Merriman. The old doctor sighed when Ethan mentioned Lena. "She's fading fast, Marshal. I've tried to get her to rest, to eat, but she won't hear it. Says others need it more." He shook his head. "A woman can't run on will alone." From the mercantile owner, Mrs. Halpern, Ethan learned more than he wanted to know. "She sold her quilt last month," the woman whispered. "And before that, her tools, her dishes, even her late husband's boots. Only thing she ain't sold is that wedding ring." She lowered her voice. "Pride's killing her as surely as the cold." Ethan felt the weight of each word settle into him. Next, he stopped by the schoolhouse to speak with Miss Ellery, who handled what little record-keeping the valley had. She confirmed what the others hinted at: children in nearby settlements had been disappearing for months. Most folks assumed they ran off or froze in the wilderness. But Miss Ellery had suspected otherwise. "I saw them once," she murmured. "Small shapes slipping through the trees near Lena's cabin. I thought it was my imagination." Ethan's jaw tightened. It wasn't. He turned to leave, but the teacher stepped forward, her eyes worried. "Marshal, don't blame her. Those children had nowhere to go. And Lena Porter, she's got a heart too big for her own good." Too big, Ethan thought grimly. And too worn out. On his way back through town, he heard more stories, whispered from doorways and over counters. Her garden had died in the drought. She hadn't bought fresh meat in months. Caleb, her son, had been seen coughing so hard he could barely breathe. And every person ended with the same words. She refused charity. By the time Ethan mounted his horse again, his blood felt hotter than any fire burning in the valley. He rode fast, wind stinging his face, mind full of a single, heavy truth. This wasn't just one woman in trouble. It was a failure of the entire valley. Their neglect had pushed Lena to the edge. And she had chosen to let herself fall so the children wouldn't. Ethan reached her homestead by late morning, but he didn't approach. He watched from the hilltop. Smoke rose from her chimney now, a thin, weak thread. He saw Caleb step outside, wrapped in blankets too small for him, his face drawn and tired. He was a child, yet he carried firewood like a man far older. Lena stepped out behind him, steadying herself on the doorframe. Even from a distance, Ethan saw her sway. She steadied herself with a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the line of children emerging from the woods in search of her. She greeted each one with a tired smile. A smile she didn't have the strength to give. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. This had gone far beyond a matter of pride. She was dying in slow, quiet steps. And if he waited any longer, those children would die with her. Right there, watching her struggle through the snow, Ethan Carver made his first real vow. He would not stand by and watch a woman sacrifice herself because the valley had failed its own. He would help her, whether she wanted it or not. For the first time, he ignored the voice that whispered about boundaries and respect. This wasn't charity. This was survival. And he intended to make sure Lena Porter and every child she fought for survived the winter. The next morning brought little warmth, only a pale sun pushing weakly through the clouds. Ethan Carver rode the ridge above Lena Porter's homestead, his coat pulled tight against the bitter wind. He told himself he was only checking in, only observing. But the truth pressed on him. He was counting how many days she had left if he didn't intervene. From the hilltop, he could see everything. Children huddled around a fire that barely burned. The cabin's roof sagged even lower under the weight of new snow. Lena moved slowly, far too slowly, as she crossed the yard to gather water. Her steps dragged. Twice she paused, bracing a hand against the wall as dizziness overtook her. "Lord help us," Ethan murmured, the words slipping out from a place deeper than thought. By late morning, the wind changed direction, blowing toward him. With it came the sound of coughing, a wet, rattling cough he recognized from sickness on the trail. He spotted the source, Caleb, leaning against the cabin doorframe, shivering despite the blankets wrapped around him. Lena rushed to his side, her worry clear even from a distance. Ethan's chest tightened. Caleb wasn't just hungry. The boy was sick. Dangerously so. The rancher inside him calculated how many days a child could last in such a state. The lawman inside him weighed the danger to the other children. And the man inside him, the one who owed a childhood debt of kindness, felt something close to anger rise. Enough was enough. He rode down the ridge, but he didn't approach the homestead. Not yet. He watched from the tree line, unseen. The weight of the decision forming in him needed time to settle. For hours, he observed. A little boy's hands were trembling so badly that he couldn't hold a tin cup. A girl wrapped in a coat made for a grown man, dragging on the ground. Lena was splitting her own meager portion of beans into thirds for children who weren't hers. And worst of all, every time she prepared food, she took one small spoonful for herself, pretended to swallow it, and then fed it to Caleb instead. She was deteriorating in front of his eyes. "No one can carry this alone," Ethan whispered. He rode back to the ranch with a fire inside him that the winter wind couldn't touch. The hands noticed it immediately. He strode across the yard with purpose, not stopping to greet anyone. His foreman, Boyd, called after him, confused. "Marshal? Something wrong?" "Everything's wrong," Ethan answered, and kept walking. He shut himself inside his office and stared at the blank ledger page on his desk. His mind ran like a storm, calculating, planning, reshaping possibilities. Within minutes, he'd found the answer, bold, maybe too bold, but the only one that would work. He would move Lena and the children closer, where he could care for them properly. But it couldn't be charity. Not for a woman whose pride was both her armor and her prison. It needed to be work. Honest work. A position of dignity. He opened a new ledger and wrote a title across the top in firm strokes. Head Cook and Household Manager, Copper Ridge Ranch. He listed the duties, the wages, higher than the ranch had ever paid a domestic worker, the housing, and the supplies included. Not a handout. A job. One worthy of a woman who had kept a dozen children alive through sheer grit. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. These children didn't need a patched-together solution. They needed a foundation. By nightfall, Ethan rode into Copper Ridge again. He met with ranch owners, storekeepers, church deacons, and miners. He didn't leave a single building without speaking plainly. "Kids are starving in our valley," he said. "They won't survive the winter unless we do something. All of us." He saw shock, shame, and grief spread across faces as he told them about Lena. By the time he finished his rounds, the Copper Ridge Children's Relief Fund was no longer an idea, it was a promise. A promise backed by every man and woman with a conscience. And yet, the hardest task remained. Ethan now had to tell Lena what he planned. He had to tell her he knew everything. He had to risk her pride, and her pain. But he also knew one truth as deeply as he knew his own name. If he didn't act soon, Lena, Caleb, and those children wouldn't survive another week of winter. The time for observing was over. The time for protecting had begun. Snow drifted sideways in thin, restless streaks as Ethan Carver approached the Porter homestead late the next afternoon. He dismounted a good distance away, partly out of respect, partly because he knew the sound of a big ranch horse might alarm already frightened children. He walked the last 100 yards on foot, boots crunching over ice, breath trailing white. He rehearsed the words in his head, but none of them felt right. How did a man tell a woman who'd carried the weight of a town on her shoulders that she didn't have to do it alone anymore? When he reached the porch, he knocked gently. The door swung open to reveal Nora, the oldest girl, her small face pale but determined. "Miss Lena's restin', Marshall," she whispered. Caleb's fever went up and Ethan removed his hat. "Nora, I need to see her. It's important." The girl hesitated for only a moment before stepping back to let him inside. Warmth did not greet him. The fire in the hearth was little more than a glow. The room felt thin, hollow, a place where survival had replaced living. 2 children lay on bedrolls near the hearth, wrapped in 2 thin blankets. Others sat quietly with wooden toys or scraps of cloth, their movements slow, exhausted. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was worse than yesterday. Lena emerged from the small bedroom, her hair hastily pinned, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. She paused upon seeing him, a hand bracing the doorframe. "Marshall," she said, trying to straighten. "You shouldn't have come all this way in this weather." "You're right," he said softly. "Should have come sooner." Her gaze sharpened. "What does that mean?" He glanced toward the children. "Could we speak outside? Just for a minute?" She stiffened, recognizing the weight in his voice. But after a beat, she nodded. Once on the porch, she wrapped her shawl tighter, shivering against the wind. "What's this about?" she asked. Ethan met her eyes squarely. "Lena, I know." Her breath hitched. "Know what?" "That you're feeding all these children. That they're not just strays wandering through. That you've been caring for half the valley's forgotten since the mining families left." He paused. "I know you've been going without food yourself." Color drained from her face. She turned her head away sharply. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," he said gently. "You're dying on your feet trying to save them." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "They needed someone. I was here. And now you need help." At that, Lena straightened, chin lifting. "I don't take charity, Marshall. Not from you. Not from anyone." Ethan expected that. He prepared for it. "This ain't charity," he said, carefully removing a folded paper from his coat. "It's a job." She blinked, uncertain. "I'm hiring you as the new head cook and household manager at Copper Ridge Ranch. Full wages. Housing included. Supplies provided." He handed her the paper. "You'd be responsible for feeding my crew and keeping the main house running. You take pride in work, this is honest work." She didn't reach for the paper. "That's too much," she murmured. "Too generous." "No," he countered. "It's the right amount for someone who can stretch a pot of beans like you do." Despite herself, a tiny breath of a laugh escaped. Then her eyes darkened again. "And, the children? All of them come with you? Every single one?" He let that settle. "I won't see them go hungry another day." Her hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she looked away, shoulders shaking, not from cold. "Lena," he said quietly, "no one's asking you to give them up. I'm asking you to let us help you keep them alive." She stood still for a long time. The wind hummed through the porch posts, snow dusting her shawl. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if I can accept this. I've carried this alone for so long. I don't know how to set it down." Ethan stepped closer, but not enough to corner her. "You don't have to set it down," he said. "Just let someone carry the other side." Her eyes lifted to his, wet, tired, defiant, afraid. Then a wail echoed from inside the cabin, Caleb's fever-spiked cry. Lena flinched. Ethan held her gaze. "He needs a real bed." "They all do." Her resistance wavered, cracked, then finally collapsed. "All right," she breathed. "All right. We'll come." Relief washed through him, fierce and warm. But he didn't smile, not yet. There was too much to do. "I'll send a wagon at first light," he said. Lena nodded, her shoulders sagging with equal parts fear and hope. As Ethan walked back into the storm, one truth settled in his chest. Getting them out was only the first fight. Keeping them safe. That would be the real battle. Dawn broke pale and brittle over Copper Ridge, the kind of winter morning where every breath felt like glass. A light snow had fallen overnight, smoothing the world into a quiet white sheet. Ethan Carver had been awake long before sunrise, checking the wagon, loading blankets, and preparing a kettle of broth to keep warm on the journey. He had not slept well. His mind replayed the faces of those children, sunken cheeks, trembling hands, hollow eyes that had forgotten what safety looked like. And Lena, the moment her resolve finally broke, the way she whispered "all right" as if the words weighed more than a saddlebag of ore. Now there was no room for hesitation. By the time the sun crested the ridge, Ethan was already on the trail toward the Porter homestead. The wagon creaked behind him as he urged the horses through the thinning snow. When he arrived, the scene brought a tight pressure to his throat. The children were already lined up outside, bundled as best they could manage, clutching little bundles of possessions tied in worn cloth. Some had boots too big, some had no gloves at all. Nora stood near the front, trying to look brave for the younger ones. Lena emerged last, one arm around Caleb's narrow shoulders. The boy's skin still held a feverish flush, his breath quick, but he was upright, determined, like his mother. Lena had washed and braided her hair, but her eyes were rimmed red, her expression stiff with uncertainty. "Morning," Ethan greeted, stepping down from the wagon. A chorus of soft mornings followed, small and tentative. Lena offered a thin nod. "We're ready." Ethan crouched beside Caleb first. "You feelin' strong enough to ride in the wagon, bud?" Caleb nodded. "Mama says we're goin' someplace warm." "You are," Ethan assured. "Warm, safe, and with a full belly every night. That's a promise." As the children climbed aboard, Ethan lifted the smallest ones, making sure each was wrapped in a thick blanket. He noted the way they watched him, tired, careful, wary, but something in their eyes flickered. A spark of trust, faint but there. Lena remained on the porch, her gaze fixed on the cabin she was leaving behind. The collapsing walls, the patched windows, the charred firewood stump. Every inch of that place bore the marks of her fight to keep those children alive. "You all right?" Ethan asked quietly, approaching her. She swallowed hard. "It feels wrong, leavin' it." "It's not leavin'," he said gently. "It's survivin'. You did everything you could here. Now you get to do more somewhere better." Her eyes glistened. "I don't know who I am without all this." "You're still you," he replied. "Just with more help." She let out a shaky breath and nodded. Ethan offered her his hand, not commanding, not assuming, simply offering. After a long moment, she placed her palm in his. He helped her down the porch steps and guided her to the wagon. Once everyone was settled, Ethan climbed onto the driver's bench beside her and snapped the reins. The horses set off, leaving the frail little cabin behind. Some of the younger children stared back at it until the trees swallowed it from view. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. The snow thinned along the trail, revealing stretches of hard earth and pale winter grass. The children grew restless, whispering or leaning against one another for warmth. Almost there, Ethan called back at one point. When they rounded the bend and Copper Ridge Ranch came into view, the wagon fell silent. Even the horses seemed to sense the moment. The ranch stretched wide and well-kept, solid fences, strong barns, and smoke curling from the main house chimney. And there, on the gentle rise at the property edge, stood the newly purchased cottage. Fresh paint on the shutters. Thick stone chimney. Sturdy porch. Windows glowing with lamplight. A real home. Lena's breath caught, her hand gripping the wagon rails so tightly her knuckles whitened. You did all this overnight?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Bought it yesterday. Spent half the night fixin' what needed fixin'." The rest of the men pitched in. They wanted to help. Tears filled her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks as she stared at the cottage. "It's yours," Ethan said softly. "For as long as you want it." The wagon rolled to a stop. The children stared, wide-eyed, stunned. And for the first time since Ethan had met her, Lena Porter looked not just tired, not just desperate, but hopeful. The wagon rolled to a gentle stop at the edge of the cottage, snow crunching under its wheels. The children scrambled down first, some with cautious curiosity, some with the awkward, careful movements of those unaccustomed to comfort. Blankets were tucked, small hands warmed in mittens too big, yet still welcome. Their eyes flickered from the cottage walls to Ethan Carver, then to Lena Porter, uncertain if this was truly real. Lena lingered in the wagon a moment, Caleb clutching her skirt. Her chest heaved with a mix of awe and disbelief. The cottage, sturdy and welcoming, smelled faintly of pine and fresh wood. Smoke drifted from the chimney, promising warmth. A fire had been lit, already burning bright and even, ready for the first meal that evening. Supplies of food, blankets, and medicine sat neatly in the corner, waiting to be unpacked. It was a miracle the valley hadn't seen before, at least, not one so quietly assembled. Ethan dismounted and extended his hand again. "Come on. Let's get everyone inside." Lena hesitated, a shiver passing through her, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she was stepping into. I don't know if I can do this," she admitted in a whisper. "You can," Ethan said softly. "You've done it before, but now you won't be alone. That makes all the difference." She nodded slowly, gripping Caleb's hand, and guided the children inside. Their eyes grew wide as warmth reached them first, then the bright, organized interior, beds lined up, baskets of fresh blankets, shelves stocked with food, and a small table already set for a simple meal. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, nourishing, and steady, the exact opposite of the fragile, crumbling life they had left behind. As Lena helped them settle, Ethan stepped aside for a moment, watching her. She moved among the children with the same care she had always shown, but now there was a lightness to her shoulders, a glimmer in her eyes that hadn't been there in months. She was beginning to breathe again, cautiously, but breathing nonetheless. At the edge of the room, Caleb tugged her sleeve. "Mama. It's warm. And there's food. And we have beds." His voice carried the disbelief of a child who had known hunger too long. She forced a small smile. "Yes, Caleb. We do." Ethan cleared his throat gently. "Lena. I've also made arrangements. You'll be the head cook and household manager here at Copper Ridge. Your job is to take care of the kids, take care of the kitchen, and take care of yourself, too. You're in charge. You won't have to ask permission for anything." Lena's eyes widened. Her hands trembled slightly. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan replied. "Just accept it. That's all I ask." She swallowed hard. Pride, which had always been her shield, softened, cracking in the presence of undeniable care. I can try," she whispered. I'll do my best." Ethan nodded. "That's all anyone could ask of you. Outside, the wind rattled against the cottage walls, but inside, the warmth of fire, food, and shelter created a protective bubble. The children began to unpack what little belongings they had carried, their murmurs filling the room with a quiet excitement. The smallest ones clutched their new blankets, while Caleb wandered cautiously toward the food supplies, eyes wide with amazement. Lena moved among them, organizing, soothing, and assigning small tasks with a careful hand. For the first time in months, she felt capable again, not just of surviving, but of truly caring. The fear that had weighed on her for so long began to lift, replaced with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in ages: hope. Ethan lingered near the door, watching her, a faint smile touching his lips. He could see the change already, the first small cracks in the wall of exhaustion and pride that had kept her isolated. He knew the work ahead would not be easy, but this was the start. This was the moment where survival began to shift toward life. Caleb looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Marshall, will Mama be okay now?" Ethan knelt beside him, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yes, son. She'll be okay. And so will you, and all your friends." The warmth of the fire, the soft laughter of the children, and the gentle presence of Lena moving among them marked the first night of a new beginning. For the first time, the cottage felt alive, not just a building, but a home. Outside, the winter wind howled through the pines, indifferent to human struggles. But inside, the fight to protect, to nurture, and to rebuild had begun. And with it came the quiet miracle that one woman's courage and one man's determination could change an entire valley. Lena Porter finally allowed herself to hope. And for Ethan Carver, watching her step into that hope, he knew that the hardest part had been done. The rest would be work, love, and quiet persistence. But for the first time, survival had a future. The days that followed brought a rhythm the valley hadn't seen in years. Lena Porter settled into her role as head cook and household manager with a careful determination, organizing the children, preparing meals, and tending to the cottage with a pride that had been absent from her life for too long. She moved with purpose, guiding the little ones in ways that balanced discipline with warmth, teaching them small lessons about order, cleanliness, and kindness. Each task she completed was a quiet victory, a testament to her resilience and dedication. Caleb, once pale and fragile, began to thrive. His cheeks regained a healthy color, his laughter returned in bursts that echoed through the rooms, and his energy surprised even Lena. She watched him chase the other children across the yard with a mixture of awe and relief. Each day, he grew stronger, each laugh a small affirmation that they had made the right choice in leaving the crumbling cabin behind. The ranch hands were cautious at first, unsure how to treat the influx of children into their routine. But Lena's presence changed that. She welcomed the boys and girls into the kitchen, guiding them gently, and the hands, initially wary, began to soften. Soon, meals were shared with everyone, the children, the ranch hands, even neighbors who had heard of the effort. Sunday suppers became a new tradition at Copper Ridge, long tables filled with laughter, conversation, and the simple joy of shared meals. Ethan Carver watched all of this quietly from the edge of the activities. He saw Lena's transformation, her posture lifted, her eyes brighter, her hands steady. He saw Caleb's joy and the way the children responded to her care. And he reflected on his own past, the kindness a neighbor had once shown to his widowed mother, a debt he had promised to repay one day. Now, through Lena, that promise was fulfilled. He walked to the porch of the cottage one evening as the sun dipped below the ridges, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Lena was there, arranging firewood for the night, Caleb beside her. She looked up as he approached, offering him a small smile. "You've done more than I could have imagined," he said quietly. "Not just for the children, but for all of us here." Lena shook her head. "I couldn't have done it alone. I see that now." Ethan nodded. "You don't have to. That's the point." Together, they watched as the children played near the edge of the yard, their laughter carried on the wind. It was a sound that seemed to push the winter cold back, replacing it with warmth and life. The cottages and ranch buildings glowed in the evening light, a symbol of care, stability, and hope. Ethan finally spoke of his past, quietly and without fanfare. "When I was a boy, a neighbor helped my mother after my father died. They kept us alive, gave us hope. I promised myself I would pay that forward someday. I didn't know how, until now." Lena listened, the lines of worry on her face softening. "I never thought anyone would see what I've done," she said. "I thought I was alone in carrying it all." "You weren't," Ethan replied. "Not anymore." The children ran past, shouting, calling each other names, their shouts ringing with pure joy. Caleb tugged Lena's hand and pulled her toward the cottage, eager to share his new adventures. Lena laughed softly, her voice lighter than it had been in months. She had become the heart of the ranch, the steady center around which the children and adults alike began to revolve. And in that moment, Ethan understood something profoundly simple: miracles didn't always arrive in the form of gold or grand gestures. Sometimes, they began with a single act of kindness, a hand offered, a meal shared, a wage delivered at dusk. Lena and Ethan stood side by side, watching the valley bathe in the golden light of early evening. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying with it the promise of endurance, love, and community. One woman's courage, one man's resolve, and the hearts of the children they saved had transformed not only their lives but the lives of an entire valley. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan said softly, "Sometimes the smallest act can become a miracle that changes an entire valley." Lena nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed it. Together, they turned back toward the warm glow of the cottage, the laughter of children guiding their way home. The valley was no longer a place of mere survival, it had become a place of life, hope, and quiet, enduring miracles. If you enjoyed this story of courage and kindness in the Wild West, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a tale of hope and heroism from the frontier.